Daughter of Albion, welcome to the Gauntlet.
Hello.
Are you ready to take on the...
Yeah, I'm
it's a
buzzing.
terrifying prospect, I know.
I'm buzzing. Let's do this.
Everyone who's been through the Gauntlet so far has had fun. So, you can relax. It's not too
Through the
stressful.
gauntlet. Oh my lord. It's like the Triwizard Tournament or something.
It is. It's the modern equivalent.
Or the Crusade.
So, round one, what do you fancy? Music, economics, or cosmology?
Ooh, let's go for cosmology, shall we?
Fun. Okay, here are your three options. Number one, the anthropic principle is a cop-out. I did have to explain what the anthropic principle was to Sargon yesterday. The universe is a simulation, or time travel is impossible. Any of those take your fancy?
I like the universe as a simulation. Why don't we do that one?
Let's lock it in. Now, you can either argue in favour or against that proposal. So, are you going to be saying the universe is or isn't a simulation?
I might say is just to be a contrarian. How about that? We'll go dissident mode, shall we?
Great. Take it away.
Okay, so firstly, what do we mean by a simulation, I suppose? Are we talking some sort of holograph or hologram? The first thing I'm thinking of is that experiment once done by the philosopher, I think it's Robert Novick, and it's called the flotation tank. Do you know that one?
No, go on, tell me.
It's really basically it's the original premise for the Matrix. Everybody thinks that they're all based and red pilled by talking about the Matrix and follow the white rabbit red pill, but really it comes a lot earlier from this flotation tank experiment. And the premise is if you were presented with a tank in which you could step into and everything would be simulated, but for the rest of your life the universe would be simulated so that you would really have a bounty of money and pleasure, and for the rest of your life it would be nothing but enjoyable experiences. The conundrum was, how many people did this philosopher think that would step into the tank, the flotation tank? And it's essentially the idea of the Matrix. And he posited in the end that at the last second everybody would be tempted, but really at the last second nobody would. But I disagree with that. I actually think a considerable number of people would. And I sometimes wonder to myself whether I'm in the simulation right now. And if everything is, maybe I'm sort of floating like a baby in some kind of, like...
You think you would choose it?
I don't know.
In an alternate reality where you were given that choice, you think you would have gone for
chosen it? You know, maybe we've chosen
right.
it. I suppose also there's this question of multiverse as well. Now, I'm certainly no expert on string theory or multiverse, but I do remember a scientist talking about, I don't know if it was Stephen Hawking, I think it might have been actually, a girl had asked him in an audience one time how she could get over her heartbreak about one of the members of One Direction not ever knowing who she is and the fact she'd never marry him. And he explained to her, well, in a multiverse, you are married, you're with children, etc., and so on. And
I didn't know Dawkins did a line of kind of agony aunt.
It was either
teenage
Dawkins
girls
or Hawkins. I don't remember. It might have been Stephen, but I don't.
That seems somehow more plausible.
He's a right mooner. I can see him doing agony aunt pages.
Maybe.
So, gosh, simulation. Okay, so I just take a moment to think that's the first thing I think of regarding simulation.
So
I've had a few... Sorry, go on.
The flotation tank concept is that you would choose to lie in this flotation tank and you'd forget about the real world and you'd just live in this blissful ignorance. The world would be made perfect, which doesn't seem to reflect our reality. Like, I'd say if you look around the world, the amount of suffering and pain going on makes me think we're not in a flotation tank.
Well, that's the second part, I guess, is of the flotation tank conundrum is maybe something went wrong, or it was programmed in error, or maybe the coder was having an off day or some such. But it's a good point. Yeah, I don't know. If I had chosen, you'd be fuming, wouldn't you?
Right, this isn't what I signed up for. If I remember in The Matrix, the explanation was that humans rejected the universe being too perfect, so they had to scale it back and make it an imperfect universe, just so that the humans would accept the premise.
That's actually a really good point. I forgot about that part. Well, because I suppose ultimately the conundrum is authenticity. You know, could you bear? I mean, of course, when you step in, you'll never know. But right at that moment, you're aware that everything henceforth will be. You won't be aware of it, but I suppose it depends. You're weighing up the value of authenticity at that. You know, those last few seconds of making the decision, and how valuable are they to you? I don't know. I mean, I don't. I think maybe he was right. You wouldn't step in at the end, but
if you would step in, given the choice, does that mean we are likely to be in a simulation? I guess there's the argument that if we can make loads of simulations, and then within those simulations, the people can make lots of simulations, the total number of people in base reality is quite small. And the total number of people who are living in a simulation or a simulation of a simulation is relatively quite high. Although, what I would counter that with is, if you're going to run a computer in a simulation, it still has to run those computations on the simulation above. So you can't just nest them infinitely. You always end up with inefficiency. This is a bit of a computer science argument, but
I know I like that. I guess is that the whole idea of the glitch in the Matrix?
Oh yeah, yeah. So do we see anything in the world around us that suggests that there's a clue that says, "Oh, that's a bit like a simulation"?
Have you ever had an experience where have you ever seen Inception? You know, where the building, the wall comes up or something like that? I mean,
I'll be honest, I've never seen a wall fly into the sky like that scene from Inception.
Well, neither have I, to be clear. But
so then, on our experience, then it's a pretty realistic universe that we're living in. There is something that makes me think, "Oh, that's kind of simulation-y." Have you heard that down at the very smallest level, there's a Planck length and a Planck time, which I think were both discovered by Max Planck. And the idea is that the details I'm a little fuzzy on. It's something like subatomic particles cannot coexist within a certain distance of each other, and time cannot be subdivided as a kind of quantum nature to space and time, almost like you would get a grid within a simulation. You know, in a computer, everything has to be stored as, you know, you have a certain level of floating point precision, and if you get too precise, then you run out of bits to store the data. And it feels to me, not being a physicist, but from what I heard about the Planck distance and the Planck time, it sounded to me very similar to like what you would discover if you were in a simulation. So all I'm saying is,
I wish I wish we were better at physics. I mean, you sound like you're pretty switched on with is that some kind of computer science type? So there's there has to be a certain distance between particles for time, something like that.
Yeah, my understanding is that there is. You think that if you zoom in and zoom in, you've got these tiny subatomic particles, and they can be infinitely close to each other. My understanding is that. So, for example, a neutron star, I think. You know that
sort of
matter squashes closer and closer together, but when you get to the point of a neutron star, it hits a very specific density, and all of the subatomic particles in the neutron star are essentially right next to each other at an atomic scale, And I think that is connected to this Planck distance. People in comments can correct me if I'm butchering the details here. But
no, I love that. I wish I were better at this stuff, because it is endlessly fascinating. I mean,
I feel like the Pauli exclusion principle is connected to this as well. But
ooh la la! Are you sure you're not a physicist?
Well, any physicist would know that I'm just throwing terms out in a haphazard way rather than using them with precision.
Oh, I'm impressed, because I'm a total plebeian with that. I mean, because I mean, when you said simulation, honestly, I guess I thought of there was a theory I knew a little while back on the science scene of the hologram. You know, is there some sort of screen or hologram? I know a lot of flat earthers, if you can believe it, actually imagine that there's some sort of hologram where there's somebody switching on a big light on and off up there, and I'm not sure. I don't know.
Well,
would simulation mean that you're observing some sort of projection from a larger sort of subterranean screen you can't see? Or does it mean that there is a genuine sort of matter has been materialized that we're interacting with? Or is it more
that's a very good question.
Or is it more that you're in a kind of coma and it's a projection onto your sleep consciousness, or you're in REM sleep or something? I don't know.
That's a very good question. What does it even mean to be what would be the opposite of it being a simulation? Is it just a definitional question? Is our reality an illusion? Is maybe a connected question.
Yeah.
The thing with the Matrix that's interesting is that the world Neo is living in at the beginning of the movie looks like our world. Turns out to be a big lie, and he's plugged in to a device or a machine that's tricking him. And I guess you'd say that if that's the case, you're in a simulation, right? If you're being fooled or tricked in some way. But it does kind of raise the question of what would it mean for something to be real? Like, maybe the true deep reality is this sort of strange spiritual soulish,
like the kind of platonic realm of form sort of thing. Because I mean, in the film, I know they're in like little pods, aren't they? So I guess their simulated reality is more of a, I don't know if they're in sleep or some sort of state of comatose state, but is the idea that it kind of it's being directed straight into their brains, and I don't know, mimicked there.
Yeah, they're being used as batteries in some way. But it always raises the question of, well, what if the reality that Neo goes to is also a fiction? You know, what if he could go a level deeper, right?
It's so meta. Well, there's an element of that even in Blade Runner, I think, with the replicants, and the sort of endless cycle of infinite regress of just this inability to touch something authentic, and you're never sure, is it a replicant or not? Is Deckard a replicant? Kind of enough to make you crazy, I guess, but I don't know. But
I've been thinking about these questions a lot, because the audio play that I've been working on, Ascension, that's going to be released at the end of Lambster, is kind of a Matrix derivative in a way. So I've been thinking about these questions a lot, and whether or not the Matrix series itself came up with the most interesting direction based on those premises.
It seems a lot of people seem to really resonate with it, not just because of Andrew Tate, I think, but about the Matrix. But I'm sure I think it was Robert Nozick was the name I was thinking of, American philosopher, for anyone who's interested with the flotation tank thing. But this question of the authentic, I guess even Descartes really, how do I substantiate that I really am, I think. Whereas Heidegger would say it's to dwell, or to, it's the interaction with the objects we have around us that substantiate Dasein or being. Even in Inception, they have that little spinning top thing, don't they, as the kind of emblem or moniker for whether something's reality, if you're in the mode of reality. But I mean, I don't know. I would keep going until I found probably a better simulation, I'll be honest. So.
Well, we've gone over time on round one, but I was enjoying it so much. So I'm going to give you 12 points for round one. You're off to an incredible start.
How much is that out of curiosity? Or no, not
There's
allowed to.
there's no cap. You can know because the answer is there isn't a
Oh,
limit.
cool. All right,
Um,
cool. As long
but
as I pick
I
the
would
hard one.
say round one, the best, the average score for round one
Hmm.
is much lower than 12. So you're ahead of the pack.
Sweet. As long as I
Put
beat
it that
Sargon,
way.
eh?
Well, you've given
Cool.
yourself a high target there because Sargon's currently in the
Oh,
lead
Sargon.
by,
Oh,
by quite a substantial
Sargon.
margin.
Do we all have the same
All
questions
right.
of curiosity, I guess?
Uh, every so you've got these three categories for round two.
Mm,
Everybody gets given the same three categories for round
okay,
two,
cool.
but once you've picked a category,
Mhm.
everybody gets a slightly different selection of questions of assertions
Hmm.
within that category.
Mhm.
Speaking of which, ethics,
Yeah,
history, or metaphysics?
why don't we go to metaphysics?
Oh, you're picking some fun choices. Our consciousness ceases after we die.
Oh, great.
Reality is purely physical, or objective moral laws exist. And remember, you can pick either to argue in the affirmative or the negative for any of these.
So our consciousness is us. Okay, I'll probably go for reality is purely physical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Gosh, why do I start with this one? Well, we were just talking about. I brought up Descartes a moment ago. I suppose if we were going to start with reality, how do we define and substantiate firstly reality, and then how do we articulate, or how do we, what are the predicates to
Mm-hmm.
determine what is reality? And I suppose I immediately think of Martin Heidegger. So Heidegger he writes a considerable amount about what he calls the Dasein, so Dasien, I think, which is really just being in the world. And so Heidegger says, unlike the Cartesian mode, which is I think, therefore I am, Heidegger would say, well, I exist in relation to objects. So it's very object based, and this is what in his work, he refers to the theory of dwelling. What does it mean to dwell within the world? And dwelling for Heidegger is to be, we can substantiate it in relation to material matter around us. So, like, what's the term in Latin? Like the deject membra, which is kind of like scattered or material bits and pieces, like fragments or things. And reality for Heidegger would be qualified or quantified in terms of the beings, not only the beings that exist in tandem with us, in I guess what Burke would have called the first person plural, but also just the physical material objects that we're surrounded by. So for reality to be purely physical, I suppose you would first require some sort of, so Descartes, for him it was enough to think about reality in terms of consciousness. To have some sort of self-reflecting consciousness was enough, or substantial for him, I guess, to qualify being. Whereas Heidegger would say, in order to perceive ourselves as physical beings in reality, this requires some sort of what does he call it, like a tapestry, or a material tapestry, I guess, that
Mm-hmm.
it embeds you in the world. It kind of anchors you into the world. I mean, as for whether or not reality is purely physical, I guess I've not answered that question. Um,
Mm.
well, let me think about that. I suppose well, we then need to think about the modes of being in the world. I suppose the question of essences or the ethereal. I suppose maybe aesthetics, the school of aesthetics as being, the theories upon beauty. I suppose these are types of reality: beauty and ugliness, or divinity. I suppose reality is also substantiated through experience, not just of tangible things, but of forms that are beyond mortality, but are simultaneously witnessed in the mortal, I suppose. And I think beauty would be one of those. I can't tell if I'm talking up my arse or not, but I'm really trying.
No, I'm very impressed. You must. I feel like you must have some education in philosophy, because these are very heady
A long
concepts.
time ago. A long time ago. It's been quite a while though.
I find Heidegger quite difficult to follow. So I felt like I was kind of just about keeping up with you there.
Oh,
Um,
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I hope it didn't sound pretentious. You know, the reason I've always liked
no?
Heidegger is because of his writing on poetry, and I was quite interested
Hmm.
in poetry. But also, he writes about homeland and what it means to dwell in a home. So how do we
Hmm.
see ourselves as not only people but as part of a kinship of a people, ancestry, lineage, and so on. And that's what he writes about in terms of dwelling. You're part of a not consequence, a sequence of
Hmm.
other kins, I guess. That, yeah, but when he says poetically man dwells, that's one of my favorite lines from Heidegger, because I suppose it's a
Hmm.
mode of dwelling in the world that is not uniquely physical or matter based. It is divine and ethereal, but it is also observable in, and also something
Hmm.
we experience, I suppose, sentimentally as well. I really like that idea of poetically man dwells. So, and by dwelling again, he just means our existence, our being in the world. So, I guess in terms of just authorship of being, but also engagement in a kind of phenomenological sense. Gosh, it's been quite a long time though. He talks about the human condition as something that can be discovered in. It's not necessarily matter. You know how Burke talks about like the local forms of first person plural.
Hmm.
It's kind of similar to that. So you're inside of a pre-existing, I guess, well, I suppose civilization. I should probably stop there. I don't know. Maybe I'm not sure if I've gotten too carried away there.
No, that's great. So the physical, I suppose, because we've in a way you've dived deep into reality and the question of being,
Hmm.
and then the other half here is physical. And I guess to say that reality is purely physical would be to put a limit on that which exists, and that doesn't line up, I think, with how most people feel
Hmm.
intuitively as children. We
Yep.
we believe in all sorts of magical and supernatural things, and yet it's become the well, maybe it's less so today than it was 10 years ago, but it's become the kind of sophisticated thing to
Mm.
claim to have outgrown those kinds of illusions, and
Mm.
all the things that you thought as a child were special turn out to just be tricks, and in reality everything is physical, and physical becomes this reductionist,
Yes.
or I guess that people allow themselves to speak in higher terms, but that is a pure language game, right? That we use metaphors and similes, and what we're actually describing is quite down to earth. So I suppose the question is, do you
Mm.
think that's just language games, or do you think there really are enchanted corners of reality and mysteries, deep, mysterious things out in the ontological ether?
Of course, absolutely. I actually think you use the word intuitively, but I also think the imagination, the realm of the imagination,
Hmm.
not just in terms of fiction, but in even just in great works of art, to experience a painting and to see, I suppose, maybe let's take off the top of my head, John Singer Sargent's famous painting in World War One. I think it's called Gassed, or it might be called Gas Attack. It's like a line of World War One soldiers, and a lot of them have been blinded from machine gun fire or shells and whatnot. And in a painting like that, although it is quote unquote technically fiction materially, it's a form of reality that's been, I guess, like rhetorically and poetically intensified through art. And so it is a form of
Hmm.
truth and reality through the medium of painting, I guess. Um, And I suppose, yeah, so reality, of course, is also experienced through the imagination, through art, through the sentiments, through, dare I say, feelings, and intuition, I guess, of the divine, a sense of the divine, maybe, I guess. So I suppose the answer is no. But that's why I like Heidegger's idea of poetically man dwells, because it's a combination of not just where he resides in the world, but where he resides in terms of physical place, but also in terms of cognitive status. I don't
Like
know.
you locate yourself not just with GPS coordinates, but also within a history, within a conceptual space,
Yes.
within an ideological lineage, within a
Yes.
parental line, etc., etc. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that's what it means to be at home in the world, as he says. Yes, exactly. I love that.
Well, I'm going to give you 14 for that round,
Nice.
which is. I mean, there is no cap on the scores, but 14 is the highest score that I've actually given out. So you can consider that top marks.
Thank you so much.
So, round 3, cinema and theatre, world affairs, or epistemology?
Cinema and theatre.
Nice. All right. Entertainment is the primary utility of cinema. Casting should reflect demographic realities. Or each generation gets the culture they deserve.
Perhaps the first one, entertainment, is the primary utility of cinema, I suppose.
And do you think that it is, or are you arguing against?
I would argue against.
All right, take it away.
I should start by saying I'm not much of a film buff, but I suppose if I were to look at cinema as an art form, which I know that many do, again, I'm not terribly well versed on cinema, but I imagine for a great many cinema lovers, this is something considered as a form of art of visual and aesthetic beauty, and I suppose in that sense, it really brings us back to the question, I guess, of. It kind of reminds me of something that a literary critic called Harold Bloom once said. He said that the pleasures of reading are selfish rather than social. And what he meant was, when we read, and I guess we can put it into the context here of watching a film, it is for personal pleasure, as opposed to create something for the other. Where I suppose, and I guess it kind of reminds me of what John Stuart Mill writes about when he talks about high and low forms of pleasure. If entertainment is to be the utility, and utility itself is quite an interesting word, because quite a cold, mechanical word, right, isn't it? I suppose it is for entertainment purposes, but to what extent does cinema also captivate the senses? Yeah, to what extent does it communicate truths, or to what extent is there a message to be deciphered? I suppose cinema. I suppose one does go to watch a film merely for pleasure, but I suppose maybe it brings us on to, like Mill talks about the quantity and the difference between the quantity and quality of pleasure. I know he debated Jeremy Bentham about this. And so if we were to see cinema uniquely as just entertainment as opposed to an art form, then, because as an art form, not much of a cinema lover, but I would imagine, high cinema or high art would be considered that which is a film of a special merit or artistic merit. So something of a certain caliber, that's maybe got some technical skill or intelligent and creative flair behind it. It's got some visual and aesthetic prowess, rhetorical power. If you've ever watched a very compelling movie, it's basically kind of a film that has a lasting imaginative effect on the viewer. And so I suppose in that way, the utility of cinema is not uniquely entertainment. Actually, thinking about it, of course, I can't believe I never said this before. It's propaganda also. The idea that cinema is put out for us uniquely for entertainment. I mean, Lord above, you just have to watch Devon Stack Blackpilled streams to see his takedown of cinema and whatnot.
Yeah.
Gosh, entertainment. I mean, I suppose entertainment in the sense that it is. just like reading, I suppose we oftentimes forget that enjoying an art form is also something that is intended to be a pastime of pleasure rather than of scholarship. It depends on you as the watcher or the observer. Are you watching the film as a scholar trying to deduce the individual, the color schemes and the way that the characters interact and I don't know, the kind of visual. Gosh, I wish I had a better language for cinema. I guess I'm thinking of theatre as well, though. Theatre. The idea that theatre is for entertainment, but it is also so. I mean, if you went to watch Titus Andronicus or anything by Shakespeare, it is also there to, I suppose, to elevate the soul. It is also there to. It's, is it historically prescient? I suppose there's a certain type of elegance, and it's maybe an injection of beauty into the world. I don't know. What do you think? I wish I were better. I'm not much of a film buff, but.
Well, I think people go to the cinema with the intention of being entertained, and then the experience that they have acts on them and does much more than they intended. Well, for good and bad, as you mentioned with Devon Stack, he has pulled apart the you could argue malicious ways in which messaging has been injected into Hollywood films. But then I sort of sense that if I were in a position of great power, I might ask for the arts to serve a positive good without asking the people. That I understand that most people, their primary interest is going to be to relax, to have a good time, to bond with their friends. They go along to the movies and watch the latest blockbuster and don't think that much of it. But you're kind of missing a trick if you're not harnessing the power of the arts to do something. On the other hand, I've talked to people who are artists who really reject the idea that they would consciously be a part of trying to manipulate their audience. That they make something that is as good as they can make as an object of art in itself. Yeah. And then, but I kind of think whether or not it's intended, the artwork will necessarily form you. We are affected by the things that we encounter, and the thing about cinema is that it's such a totalizing art form. When you're subjected to it, it's completely, especially if you're not thinking about it in a critical way, you're wrapped with attention at the cinema. Yep. Your full visual field, and your ears are overwhelmed by the sound and the music, and it's all carrying you to this complete other dimension of experiences. So yes, I think entertainment is maybe the primary utility from the perspective of the audience, but what's the utility of cinema within society, or to the elite, or to the filmmaker even? I think you've got to say entertainment is more like the vehicle for the other purposes.
I suppose maybe there's maybe I'm just being snobbish about the word entertainment itself. To me, always sounds a bit sort of bread and circuses, but I suppose there's maybe it is just something that, as far as it's something that captivates the attention and imagination and to an audience. It's actually rather difficult to do, but perhaps it's, I don't know, perhaps it is a good thing, or
well, maybe this is an interesting side question of is entertainment the primary purpose of our YouTube channels? Because
I like that.
As a YouTube viewer, if I stick on a live stream, the number one thing I'm usually thinking is, or what would be an interesting thing to occupy me for the next hour or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's kind of,
it
is kind of functioning as entertainment, But on the other hand, I also have sort of a secondary interest that the things that I listen to ought to improve me, ought to educate me, and form my mind in useful directions. So I suppose the same may be true of cinema. That if you, I guess, if you choose to watch, for example, a very well thought of classic film that you haven't seen, then there's something that feels more nutritious about that.
Do you have a favorite film?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A favorite film? Oh, that's hard. It probably depends. It depends on my mood. If I was, I mean, of classic films, the kind of nutritious stuff that I was just talking about. I mean, I love Casablanca. I love Gone with the Wind.
Oh, so beautiful.
On the other hand, if I'm more like wanting the pure like entertainment, the thrill of it, I might watch The Dark Knight. Or
is that Batman? Is that Batman?
Yeah, it's the second Nolan Batman film. But then if I go to my extreme like schlocky embarrassing, then I get a embarrassing amount of enjoyment from watching like a rom-com, which is usually
Nothing
something
wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
Probably not. I kind of think that maybe there is some wisdom in the feeling that we should be embarrassed about certain types of films. In the same way as, if you like, what kind of food do you like? If you say, oh, my favorite food is McDonald's, then it's reasonable to say, well, that's operating in a fairly base way. It's just delivering you fat and sugar and
yeah, but it's so tasty, isn't it? And I mean, I suppose it's hard sometimes to. Sometimes I don't think it's sustainable. Also, are you going to constantly consider film that is, from the art house, that is some kind of metaphor for, I don't know, existential communism. Sometimes I suppose it's not sustainable. It's taxing to do that, and I think the idea that we can always consume media as though we were scholars, I certainly can't.
It's perfectly reasonable to go to McDonald's from time to time, and it's perfectly reasonable to watch the odd schlocky film. How about you? What would be your top films?
I've always really loved super cringe. I love Indiana Jones, especially The Last Crusade. I don't know whether it's just fond memories as well of watching it at Christmas, like communally with the family. Can sort of recite line for line, and I guess it is kind of, it's kind of not, it's trashy, I guess, but I don't know, I love it.
I think I didn't watch Indiana Jones at the right age. I love Star Wars, and in a very deep way, where it was the thing that I would watch on repeat when I was a little kid, and I still will defend it on a critical level, but I don't know how objective I can be. So maybe you're the same way with Indiana Jones.
Did you like the new ones? Or?
No, I got very little enjoyment out of the sequel trilogy. Yeah. I do enjoy the prequel films, and I probably would defend the 6 original films that George Lucas made as having a certain propulsion and it's the vision of one guy. Yeah. And the fact that movies seem to need an individual to drive the thing was probably one of my first red pills back in the day, when I still used to think of the world as, we can just do everything with democracy and committees and processes and systems. And then I was so innocent back then, and I just couldn't reconcile this with the observation that, well, hang on, if you can make a system that produces an item of high quality, how come Hollywood can't just throw money at producing an amazing script, an amazing film? It seems like every film worth thinking about has a person at the helm, an individual, and that started a long thought chain that's still rattling on today.
Do you know there's a really old English idiom I love? It's a camel is a horse designed by committee, and I guess that's maybe, you know what I mean? I really loved that, but I wonder with film if maybe that's what's happened, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, you've got a perfectly good horse, and then someone rocks up and says, "Well, yeah, I need this animal to also be able to cross deserts." I'm like, oh, that's gonna wreck this thing.
That's democracy for you, there. Oh,
all right. Let's see. I'm going to give you 13 for that.
cool.
Round 4. Psychology, elite theory, or theology? Theology. Divine revelation cannot be verified. God is entirely beyond human comprehension. Or faith is incompatible with scientific conclusions. Of course, these are not representing my points of view, any of these, necessarily.
No, are you sure about that? Let me just read through them again. Divine revelation cannot be verified. God is entirely beyond. I suppose God is entirely beyond human comprehension. And I suppose I would disagree with it. Firstly and foremost, because I'd imagine there's a reason that Christ came back in the form of human to teach us of God in a way that could be comprehended. And thus, if that is the form in which God delivered his son to us to know him and to interact with him on terms that we could comprehend, then I suppose it seems inaccurate to suggest that it is something beyond comprehension. And yet I suppose the premise of God being, just the premise of the transcendental in itself really does supersede what can ever be known, I suppose, by the human mind, in that it is, I think it's like Wittgenstein once said, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. There's a kind of ineffability to God and his transcendent divinity that I'm not sure language could ever fully articulate. And in that sense, maybe it does lie in a way beyond comprehension, or at least articulation. But I suppose if we know God through, we have, I suppose church provides us with ceremonies and rituals and acts of, or gestures of communion and communication with one another. And in terms of, I suppose prayer is a means of comprehension of God. But I find it difficult to comprehend God, to comprehend God in the form that is not earthly. Which is why I suppose the Trinity is such a helpful way to envision him, as well as the Holy Spirit. I'm just trying to think. I'm kind of reminded of William Paley, who had this idea of the universe or God's creation being a pocket watch. There's this sort of analogy where it says if you found the pocket watch in the forest and you picked it up and opened it, and all the laws and mechanics of God's laws of the universe, gravity and time and whatnot, would be perfectly sort of this perfect mechanical instrument. And that was kind of Paley's way of trying to, I suppose, provide us with a way of comprehending the perfection of creation, as being this sort of seamless instrument, or with these, well-oiled mechanics. But I suppose that was an analogy of Enlightenment thought that I suppose maybe is the only way in which you can ever perceive something that is beyond comprehension. I'm not sure. Gosh, I'd really need to think about this. I suppose. What do you think?
Well, you point to lots of compelling ways in which God is very difficult to understand, and there's a couple of amazing passages that I'd pick out from the Bible that that line up with what you're saying. So in Job, there's a great deal of speculation about God's nature. It goes on for like 37 chapters, different people showing up, suggesting something off the wall, some crazy idea about what God is like. God's just silent through it all until chapter 38, when finally God speaks, and he comes in and with, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer you. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched out a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set, or who laid its cornerstones? While the morning stars sang together, or the angels shouted for joy." It goes on, and the whole chapter is incredible, with just kind of underlining how limited human knowledge is. Similarly, Isaiah 55, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and your thoughts, and so much higher are my thoughts than your thoughts." So I agree that there's this fundamental aspect of divinity that's beyond what humans can ever grasp. But I also love the point that you were making, that we have been given these ways to start to cling on and grapple with God's nature. I mean, the comparisons being made that my ways are higher than your ways, bigger than your ways, when God is telling us about himself. We are made in God's image, and we can think of God as being an extreme version of some of the things that we can wrap our head around. So it's almost more like a direction. But yeah, if I think you're right, we can say that there are parts of God's nature that are beyond human comprehension, but God is not entirely beyond human comprehension. He has chosen to reveal himself to us. I often can run into people who say, "Oh, I do believe in God, but I don't believe that anybody could possibly know about God." And I think that would be true, except for the fact that God's chosen to reveal himself to us.
I guess, well, yeah, I love that. What is it you said? My ways are not your ways. Is that Isaiah, did you say?
Yeah, Isaiah 55.
And the minor bollocking he gives the guy in Job. I mean, talk about red-faced, when he... But
it's such a killer chapter. It's incredible.
I'm going to go and look it up after this, actually, remind myself.
Dude, yeah.
I mean, honestly, I'm just for me, it's always, in the beginning was the Word, I guess, and the Word was God. And I suppose if the Word is the only way that, if the Word is God, then I suppose, being a lover of language, I mean, I suppose that's maybe a question then of translation and authenticity, though, I suppose. But maybe the utterance, or
it's kind of the great question of the universe: is how do we, as created beings, grapple with the Creator? How do we reconcile that the one who made all things cares for us as individuals? There's all these mind-blowing concepts that, in a way, we can only think about so deeply, because otherwise it just blows our minds.
It's quite anxiety-inducing at times, and there's a kind of sublime. It's kind of dizzying, and kind of awe-inspiring and terrifying as well. But I suppose that just lends itself to the grandeur and the beauty, I suppose. But I suppose seeing God as well in terms of his creation, I mean, in nature is, I suppose, especially where I think I can, or in nature especially, to see the design. I suppose there's a comprehension there. But then I suppose that's what theology is for, with all the theologians to try and help us. But
Yeah, and maybe that's our job,
mm-hmm.
is to magnify the name of God, and we do that by talking about him, his attributes, what he's done. The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament proclaims the work of his hands. I always think that when you go somewhere incredible, so you go on holiday to the Alps, or you go and see the Great Barrier Reef, or an incredible desert, or you see some amazing starscape, and there's a natural impulse within us that's we want to go and find someone that we love and show them and say, look at that, isn't that incredible? Mm-hmm. So there's something about the experience of the world and nature that produces a natural impulse within us as humans to want to share the thing. And then the other thing we love to do is identify the artist. Like if you go to an art gallery, you want to know who did the painting. So there's this sense where, as a Christian, when you see the things in the natural world, the two things that is most natural to do is to like point out the amazing thing that you've seen to other people and identify who the creator is. And that in a way is like the most core job that we have as humanity, is to tell each other about God by pointing at the things that God has put around us that give us a sense of who he is in a way that we couldn't explain otherwise.
I love that. It kind of just reminded me, one of my favorite poems by Wordsworth. He's actually him going to the Alps, the area called the Simplon Pass, and he gets there and he describes feeling like really giddy, and he says he just talks about the tumult and peace there and the darkness and light. He said we're all like workings of one mind, the features of the same face, blossoms upon one tree, characters of the great apocalypse, the types and symbols of eternity, of first and last and midst and without end. I kind of really like that. It's just, I suppose, a combination of like sublime, the sublimity of God's creation, but also there's something slightly terrifying too.
Yes.
Which I like. First and last and midst without end.
That's so
I
good.
don't know if I answered your question though.
I think so. In that, what we were just discussing was little glimpses, little ways into knowing God. Showing. So the answer, if I've understood what you were saying correctly, is that God is not entirely beyond human comprehension. He's also not entirely within human comprehension. But fortunately, we do have some little ways in to there's a great expression in the old hymns. They used to say, who can plumb the depths of love divine, and things like this. And I love that idea of the the depth of the ocean, that you have this plumb line, I guess, which is for measuring the depth of the water. You go out deep enough and you just know that it's very, very deep. You don't actually know the full depth of it. And a lot of aspects of God are like that, where you go, every year I have the ability to measure God further, and he's always just proves to be so much greater and deeper and more impressive than I previously thought capable.
In this like little patchwork of, you kind of gather you collect these little glimmers and experiences and fragments of glimpses of something beautiful or wonderful, or but in little, I suppose, just like these little kind of pockets, I guess, throughout life. I like the idea of the depths. Every now and again, like a sonar beam comes back.
Right. All right, I'm gonna give you 13 for that.
Oh, thank you.
That brings us to round 5 out of 6.
Cool.
And for this round,
Yeah. Okay.
technology, natural sciences, or Christology?
Let's go natural sciences, shall we?
All right. A unified theory of physics is the ultimate goal of science. Immediate and radical action on climate change is essential. For full woke points, you go for that option. Or evolution is the origin of species.
Oh my lord, these are difficult. Oof.
You picked, you've secretly uncovered the one challenging round.
The which round?
Well, I think this is probably the hardest little subsection of the gauntlet.
All right, I can do this. Okay, I'll just quickly read through them again. Okay, unified theory of physics. Oh, this reminds me of being at school exams, scanning through the questions and going, right, which one to do.
Exactly.
Oh, Lord, evolution. I mean, probably a unified theory of physics. What am I doing? I don't know.
Yeah, you want to lock it in?
The origin of species. I mean, yeah, let's go for the top one.
Are you going to be arguing in favour or against this assertion?
I suppose in favour. Okay, so I'm not a scientist or a physician, so starting off on a... Well, okay, unified theory. I suppose the goal of any scholarly discipline is to come to some general consensus about a coherent explanation or some kind of coherent, generally agreed upon vision that explains the world around us. Now, I'm just trying to think, is unified theory some kind of physics?
I think it...
Or is
yeah,
it
so
agreed upon whole?
I think this term would usually be taken to talk about... So you've got two major branches of physics, one of which is quantum stuff, and one of which is like general relativity. So two incredibly successful theories that explain lots of observations and have loads of maths and theories and work that has happened in these two kind of silos. However, the two cannot be made to work together, at least currently. They're like in completely separate.
Right. So they're actually in opposition, would you say? Or...
There's just... So again, I also am not a theoretical physicist. So people watching will have to forgive us here for our kind of floundering. My understanding is that there's this whole world of subatomic particles which can be like pretty efficiently and beautifully explained by quite a small number of concepts to do with quanta, and those are all self-consistent, and you can do observations, and like it holds together, but it only applies to very, very small things. So you don't use quantum maths to describe macro phenomena. And then on the other side of the world, you've got the generalized version in a way of Newtonian mechanics becomes special relativity and becomes general relativity. And you can do lots of maths, you can do lots of observations, and this theory is wonderful at large scale things that operate with gravity. Right. And the issue is that there's these two like worlds are so far apart and do not connect with each other. And so people are looking for a grand unified theory that will put both of these like major tranches of physics in one kind of in one bed together. Yeah. And the thing that was the forerunner of a like exciting possible way to do this for a long time was string theory. You've
Ah,
probably heard about string
I've
theory.
heard about, but not.
However, unfortunately, string theory has turned out to be a complete dead end. And like
Oh,
the string theorists have been trying to like
oh, damn.
keep it quiet for decades, but
Is that
more or
true?
less.
Because I remember about
That's my understanding.
15 years ago, like everybody talking about it and the Higgs
Exactly.
boson and everything, and there was a lot of fuss made. Is this not? Oh, juicy.
I think the Higgs boson and the boson field and so on was all
That was all
kind
legit.
of legit, but
Okay.
but yes, there's still lots of people going around talking about how exciting string theory is, and just give us another 5 years, guys, and some more grant money and whatnot. But yeah, the impression I get is that string theory is kind of finally getting booted out for
And they're kind of
having
slowly.
failed to achieve this theory of everything. Yeah.
That's something that is fascinating. I must say, I really admire and respect physicists because that is imagine. I guess maybe by theory of everything, I guess there's this maybe this feeling that you're working toward the ultimate
Yeah.
explanation of the world in like a conclusive kind of answer.
Well,
Is
there's
that
a
the
kind of
goal?
interesting thing that physics is unrealistically effective, as in, how come we can just come up with simple mathematical equations that explain the movement of everything that we observe down to incredible levels of precision? There's no reason we would expect that to be the case, and yet it is. And what does that mean? What does it imply? I'm sure if you're a theist, then you'd say, well, there's evidence of design. And if you're an atheist, you'd say, well, that just goes to show you that our mathematical theories have no need of God. Like that, who was it? Somebody who brought a king a model of the universe and or the solar system. And the king said, where is God in this
Oh,
design?
interesting.
And he said, well, there was no need for that axiom.
Interesting.
So yeah, I don't know I don't know what to make of it.
So would
If
sorry, go on. Sorry.
well, if we found this theory of everything and reached the limits of our discovery, it would seem sad to me because I kind of feel like
Right.
I like the adventure. You know, I like the idea of being a Victorian gentleman going off on a ship to chart
Yes,
worlds
yes.
unknown, and
Yeah.
we've kind of mapped the surface of the planet, but there's still something romantic, I think, about delving deeper into the
Yeah.
microscopic or the macro, the big
You're like
and
David
small things in the
Livingstone in the
world.
jungle, when he
Yeah,
crosses, you're so right. That's such a European male thing too. I think it's very idiosyncratic, and I kind of love and find it fascinating that you're right. There would be something tragic. I'm just trying to. So when you say unified theory, is this in science? Is there this sort of this endeavor? Because I'm totally out of the science world. There's like an endeavor toward like a kind of comprehensive, final, ultimate kind of master theory that.
yeah. And the thing that was attractive
Uh,
about string theory is that it was going to be simpler as well. So I think people love the idea of elegance in maths and science,
Yes.
right? Where if you can explain the way everything works and do it with a very small number of characters, as it were, so like a really like the dream, I think, is that wow, we can
pithy.
explain both quantum and relativistic effects with this incredibly short, brilliant, genius insight. That
Yeah.
would be like from a scientist's perspective, that's the most exciting endpoint. But we've got no actual reason, in a way, we've got no philosophical reason to expect that to be true. Like, why should the world be simple and elegant? I think that's kind of what the string theorists have grudgingly had to admit is, well, we thought we had a really elegant theory. The sad thing is it was just made up and wishful
And
thinking.
I wonder, the string theory itself, something, it's the idea, isn't it, of like the vibrating strings or something like that. Is the whole thing being kind of, is it just that it hasn't ended up the theory where they wanted it in terms of conclusion, or is the entire thing undermined and it's no longer pursued as something being
As I understand it, they have zero evidence after putting quite a lot of money. So they have kind of monopolized theoretical physics spending, and totally failed to find any supportive evidence for their. They've got like a house of cards of beautiful ideas, and yet no actual, no actual reason to believe that there's any connection between their theories
You must
and
be
reality.
so disappointed to get that far in your career there. I kind of, but I also, selfishly, there's a part of me that loves it because it is a way that, to me, this is how God, right at that last moment, slightly always just quite out of reach, evades all this investment and time and mental investment into the grand equation, and still God manages to, I suppose, to, it's always slightly out of grasp. And there's, I don't know, but okay, so I mean, I'm not being in the science field. I don't know. I assume that is the ultimate goal. I don't know. Scientists have to tell us. I think. So you said it's
Well,
general relativity and quantum. Is that the two?
I think so. So maybe
terribly
one way to approach this question might be. So clearly, we've used physics to create quite a lot of actually useful technology. You know, we learn about radioactive decay, and now we can make imaging systems that can discover illnesses or whatever.
That's terrifying. Radioactive decay.
So the question is, should physics be aimed at practical things that can help humans to live better, fight disease, build transport, or is there a place in society for people purely advancing the frontier of human knowledge? Like, my brother was an incredible mathematician and hated any kind of applied maths with a passion. He just, if he was studying something and he started to realize that this might have some practical benefit to mankind, he'd lose interest immediately.
Oh gosh, what a great position to be in, that clever.
Well, yeah. So it's interesting that, in a way, people would say that exploring deeply into these kind of heady, rational questions is almost a form of theology. It's like looking into the mind of God, and has value in and of itself. Whereas I think other people would say, yeah, but you're taking all these uber clever people and you're making them spend their time on something that's basically pointless. So then the purpose of physics should be to support. It's basically, you could look at physics ideally as the first stage in an engineering process, leading to something that's of actual, tangible, measurable, quantifiable value, or just to give it its due, as a supportive element to something of unquantifiable but beautiful, an artistic expression, or some, but something where there's actual. And then I suppose you could say maybe physics. Why is physics not an aesthetic good in and of itself?
Ooh, there's a lot of depth to that question. I mean, I think I love that. I like meeting these people who have this kind of insatiable hunger to pinpoint the origin of the universe. They're miles ahead of me in perceiving the world and intellect, and I'm kind of in wonder of it. But it does seem that there's this kind of, even for the radical kind of atheist Richard Dawkins types, there is this kind of unquenchable appetite, even in their dedication in trying to disprove God, quote unquote. they still have this kind of hunger in them to pinpoint the origin of the story, I suppose. But oh dang, poor string theorists, you know. It's a bit of a blow,
Yeah,
isn't it?
I think
Ooh.
the competing branches of theoretical physics are less
Yeah, I'm sure.
less sympathetic. In their mind, this has been kind of a
They're rolling up their
ruse, you know.
sleeves. Yeah, and because I suppose that's had a lot of funding for a long time. That has it, string theory, and now maybe
Oh
maybe
yeah,
not.
like 50 years of
Whoosh.
pretending that they're just 5 years away.
I wonder how at what point they thought actually this isn't going anywhere, but I don't want to say anything. I want, you know.
Well, yes, this is why I think it's quite a funny story because the impression I get is that anybody who was actually close to what was going on has known
Mm.
for quite a long time
Oh
what's been
no!
going on.
What the? Oh,
All right.
that is double check everything.
Well,
Cool.
let's bring that round to an end. I think
Cool.
I can't give you too high of a score
No,
on
no,
accounts of the
that's
fact
fair.
that
That's fair. I chose poorly, as they say in the internet.
well, do you know it led to an interesting conversation.
It
So
did, and I was grateful for your. Oh,
at
9 is
the
good. 9 is
cost
good.
of, I'll give you a
No,
9.
I'm happy
You
with
know,
9. Okay, I've got one more to
you have
make it
plenty
up.
to say. Exactly. And here are your choices: literature, software and mathematics, or eschatology.
Let's go literature, shall we? Let's go lit
I
mode.
thought you might. All right, here are your three options. The traditional literary canon is
Ooh.
overrated.
Yeah.
The author's intent is irrelevant to interpretation, a sort of postmodern direction.
Yeah.
Or censorship of literature is dangerous.
Literary canon is overrated. Maybe the first one, the traditional literary canon is overrated.
Sure.
I am against.
Hmm.
Of course, I'm against. Okay, well, to start with, what do we mean by the literary canon? Obviously, the canon, what we know kind of colloquially as the Western canon of literature, is really comes from the canonical text. So just as we have the canonical gospels, we have the canonical, the kind of prime meat, if you like, of literary texts. And these are works which are considered to be of a particular or a special merit. So a particular esteemed artistic merit, works of such a special caliber that display, for instance, maybe a very impressive technical skill, intelligence, creative flair, linguistic prowess, or maybe rhetorical power. But they're also not just in the form and the mechanics of the writing, but also in the effect they have on the reader. So works that have a lasting imaginative impact. Now, who decides what goes into in recent years with what they call the wokeization, I guess, of culture? This is very much happens in the literary sphere as well, and it has been increasingly politicized by a combination of pseudo-feminist, pseudo kind of historicist takes. I forget who it was, but one of these types of usually French types had referred to the canon, the Western canon. They didn't say it was overrated, but they did refer to it as a bourgeois mystification. And I always remember that. And this is something that has somewhat crept into discourse on the canon. In other words, all the texts that we consider great, Dante's Divine Comedy, Milton's Paradise Lost, for instance, Shakespeare. These are the great works of art, the great high works of literature, basically the artistic best of our writers. But with the, I guess, the diversification of culture, the entrance of multiculturalism and radical egalitarianism, there has been a lot more of a push to undermine and degrade, I suppose, the existing canon, by which I should say nobody has a stronghold over. There is no sort of official panel that decides. I guess we can get into how certain works become classics in a minute, but there is an increasing. One of the lines of attack is this assertion that it is it is overrated. Wait, did your question say under or overrated? Over. Thank you. Over. Okay.
Over.
I was panicked, and I thought you didn't say under, did he? It is overrated, and this is the idea that some sort of piece of slam poetry from the West Indies, from some sort of homosexual peg-legged pirate, is, I don't know, it matches Hamlet or some such. Now, you could say that I'm being a snob in saying that that's not true, but I guess we have to kind of pinpoint, well, why isn't it true? So works that kind of make the cut, if you like, into the canon, we tend to measure their worth in so much as that they are, I guess, and they're in a possession of the quality of something that's very affecting on the imagination, the realm of the imagination, and that they represent, I guess, they represent external realities in a different manner that in which non-creative or certainly scientific literature would represent them. And so it's how they work, not only the creative artistry of the text itself, but how they work on the external mind of the reader, and also the extent to which they convey truthful and meaningful information, I guess. So to say the works of, I mean, what are the greats in the canon? How do we determine that something is over or underrated? I suppose it would be really a matter of also what kind of their emergence in the historical timeline as having been particularly prescient for the time. So I'm thinking something like Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, extremely harrowing text, but it kind of has managed to establish itself in the canon as something fixed and unmovable. So works in the canon they kind of have this unmovable, or immovable, I should say, is the correct word, status, that they have a status that is sort of untouchable. Does that make sense? And there is this kind of endeavor at present to, and that's, sorry, I should say, finish that line of thought. That's because of just where it emerged historically after World War One. It was affecting enough to be, I guess, a meaningful representative or a lasting voice. What's the American poet? Is it Emerson who calls it the barbaric yawp? It's kind of that distinguishing utterance in time, or what Wordsworth would call the prescient spot in time that will forever be the emblem that represents that era, and it's kind of untouchable, and that's where it tends to stay. So like a constellation in the galaxy of stars, I suppose. As for it being overrated, look, there is a push to try and forcibly insert international works. There is such a thing as an international, I guess, canon, but I here refer to the Western canon just because that is, in my opinion, where the great works of literature are. To my knowledge, I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, there has never been delivered that I'm aware of any kind of literary body of work from Africa or India that has matched, for instance, Shakespeare, just in terms of his extraordinary profundity, the profundity and depth of his intellect, his creative genius. It is so remarkable and extraordinary that it's almost difficult to articulate. Something like Paradise Lost, for instance, Milton's Paradise Lost. This would be a form of high literature that is so linguistically profound but clever because it's written in blank verse, but it's also it's very biblically prescient. It takes the biblical stories and it rhetorically and imaginatively intensifies them to such a point that it's, the aesthetic value, I guess is what I'm trying to say, of these works is so extraordinary that to think that they really are works that will stand the test of time. And look, I mean, you just have to look at the fact that Shakespeare is translated all over the world, everywhere. His plays are everywhere. And I'm not aware, without some kind of quotas or deliberate forcible endeavors to try and insert, lesbian slam poetry or whatever.
Yeah.
Look, there are some interesting stories from these places, but they are just not, in my opinion, they don't make the cut. Now, maybe I'm not an appropriate judge of who makes the cut, but I'm a little, there's this attitude of white men, they call it dead white men syndrome. And I can't stand that because they're not dead white men. They are wonderful writers who earned their place in the canon. They earned their place. And there's a lot of bitterness, usually from female writers or non-white writers who can't grasp or grapple, highly jealous and just can't match that kind of artistic merit. But, they have to accept that they are subpar. I'm not in the canon. I accept I'm subpar. It's, being overrated. No, I think that it is. I think it's such a. it's just the most beautiful and unparalleled delivery of. I mean, and look, there's so much in the canon. I'm trying to think of something I would consider overrated. This is, I guess, where you get onto the question of taste. There is a difference between a judging obsessive. There is such a thing, of course, as objective beauty and merit. Some people, I think, confuse the idea of it, beauty being in the eye of the beholder, for instance. A lot of people laugh at that idea, but we often forget that taste is also relevant. I don't think, for instance, I've never really thought F. Scott Fitzgerald was a terribly good writer. Who am I to judge, though? I mean, how snobby. But I never really found his works, and even some, not all, but some of Hemingway's were never, maybe I felt slightly disappointed with. There might be an argument for that, but there's also an argument, I suppose the argument there is also the point in time in which you're reading them. Yeah, I think you said that you were at a point in time where your reading of Indiana Jones was never.
Yeah, I probably didn't watch any Indiana Jones till I was in my late 20s. Right. So
you should still enjoy it, surely. I don't know.
I did enjoy it. It just didn't have the same
it's got a juvenile
completely magnetic property that Star Wars had to me.
Oh, I see. Right.
It had been brought up in my mind enormously. I mean, many of my university friends thought Indiana Jones was just this unparalleled genius thing, and so I maybe my expectations were too high.
You think, yeah?
Maybe. I thought it was great. It just didn't.
It wasn't.
It didn't have. I think what it was, I could tell while I was watching it that if I had watched it as a child, it would have had just. I think because as I was watching it, I was already analysing it. My adult brain was getting in the way and stopping me from just being swept up in the joy and adventure of it.
That's fair.
So I was kind of I was frustrated more than disappointed.
I think that's relevant. And you might say the same about a work of literature. I'm sure some people would say that I am just being a white supremacist or that I'm Eurocentric. But I mean, there's actually a really interesting book by what's he called? It's called Human Accomplishment by Charles Murray, and he quite literally, I mean, very kind of anal the way he did it, forgive my language, but he basically has catalogued human accomplishment, and it is, it's like 97% European men, and he gives an explanation at the start as to how he determines accomplishment, how he determines talent, and he looks at the great works of art and literature, and it's all European men. And so, I think people should be extremely proud of the canon that we have. It is it's an inheritance as well. And I hope that it will be added to. I'm not really sure. I don't know if we'll ever produce a Shakespeare again, but that is a part of our inheritance that
I'd argue that Jane Austen might be part of the canon. And
course, yeah.
she's not a white man. She's a white woman, I'll admit, but
there are a small number of women, Mary Ann
Virginia
Evans,
Woolf,
George Eliot, of course.
Yeah.
So, of course, absolutely, you're quite correct. I suppose I was thinking of, the more contemporary, soft, self-congratulatory,
right? Yes,
lefty types. But I mean, Jane Austen is such a great wit and extremely wry, and actually, she lampoons a great number, like George Gissing and a number of other. Even Dickens, to some extent, other writers for their own kind of what she called sort of prosaic style, and she really
I'd rate Austen above Dickens. I don't know if that's a controversial statement.
You would? Oh, that's cool. No, I'd love that. What do you think about the Brontes then? I mean, are you a fan?
I also like the Brontes. I mean, it's quite funny comparing Austen and the Brontes. As I understand it, the Brontes didn't think much of Austen. Is that the right way around?
There's a little bit of I don't know if you call it rivalry, but
okay, yeah. But I think I could enjoy them each on their own terms. I mean,
yeah.
Austen is, in my mind, just hilarious and
extremely
is doing parody. Yeah. Kind of it's like skewering the society, whereas the Bronte sisters were all trying to be a little bit more earnest and tell a heart-rending story, and they also lent a little bit more in the Charles Dickens' direction of trying to effect social change, right?
They're
They
all
had
quite
kind of
somber and severe as well, aren't they? Yeah,
yeah.
very intense and severe.
But there's something charming about them at the same time,
Oh
I
yeah,
think.
of course. You're right about Austen, though. I mean, I think it's she reminds me kind of like a early female P.G. Wodehouse in her kind of like
Yeah.
very dry, and also the kind of archetypes of the gentleman of the day, being wearing his ruffles and just falling over himself with the buckles on his shoes, just looking so utterly ridiculous.
Yeah. Isn't it true that there's no scene in Austen of two men talking to each other without a woman present, because
is that true?
Because I think she said that she had never experienced that situation, so she didn't feel like she had any way to write it accurately.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
She stuck to what she was writing observations about things that she'd actually seen in the real world. So she doesn't know how two men talk to each other.
That was very noble of her, I suppose, to acknowledge that, because I suppose how would you imagine it? Having overheard male locker room talk accidentally on more than one occasion, I suppose. Yeah, it certainly never unfolds as I imagine men. I would always imagine men would be talking about, politics, world affairs, but...
Well, I might say the same in reverse. That
Exactly. Except you'd never imagine we'd be talking about world affairs or politics to begin with. So. Be honest.
No comment.
You could surprise you.
No, that's fair. On the subject of the international nature of the canon, I think we would be happy to acknowledge like great Russian literature as part of the canon.
Undoubtedly.
Or if you go back far enough, yeah.
American too. I mean, the great American writer, the great American novel is a testament to itself. I mean, very unique and idiosyncratic. And you're right about the Russians. I mean, crikey, look at Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. Yeah. Very dense and intense and dark and complex and brooding. I'd say those are probably the two main sort of strong and the French, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, people will say, "Oh, okay, well, they're all white, they're all whatever." But I think that the list does basically reflect quality.
It does. It's not. We haven't intentionally identified white people. Look, I mean, there are a small number of. Some people would say someone like James Baldwin, who was a black writer, but for me, he's far too. He was like a sort of social activist type, and just sort of entrenched in that kind of race grievance type stuff. But some people like it. But again, I've never. I think sometimes you might get a more folklore. I think can be, or kind of oral spoken word in some more remote parts of the world can be charming, short stories and whatnot. But I've not yet seen anything to really contend with the greats. But who knows? Maybe your play, Lambda, will be.
You're saying I don't fall within the white male European.
No,
I'm not going to disprove this point, am I?
Oh, the screen is rather yellow at the moment. That is cool.
Yeah, there you go.
I meant to join them, of course, to join.
I'm in yellow face here. Right. Let's draw that round to an end. I'm going to give you another 14.
Nice.
Here is the high score table. Let me refresh it so we can see where you fall. Joint first. Exactly tied with Carl, but you fall in second place because alphabetically D comes after C. I think that's what's happened there. But I think you should be pretty happy with that. True. Yes, which would put you at the top.
Well done, Carl. Who else had
congratulations. Yeah, do you want to have a look through the rest of the list? Semigog, D, Black Horse,
Edward Dutton,
languishing at 58. Apostolic Majesty. I mean, these are some highly renowned people.
These are high marks, though. They're high scores too.
They're very high scores, and to be fair to them,
All those scores.
I've probably slightly, as as the show has gone on, there
You've got a
may
bit more
have been
cavalier.
a slight amount of grade inflation going on. So
You've got a bit more
there's
cavalier.
no shame for Paul Ferro and Nathan, who were my first
Oh,
two guests.
honestly, yeah, it's toughest to be the first for you. You're going to be more
Hopefully,
severe.
they understand that it's only natural as
Well,
time
not now that you've
passes.
admitted there's grade inflation. I don't think I'll forgive that, but I'm delighted.
Well, not everybody has always been at the top of the scoreboard after
Oh
their
my gosh,
round.
a girl beating all those boys. How embarrassing, boys. Enough of that.
Exactly.
Get back in the
How will
kitchen.
they live it down when this finally airs? They will hang their
Mortifying.
heads in
Mortifying.
shame. Well, thank you so much for joining me, daughter of Albion.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and happy Easter weekend to you.
Yeah, come back next year. See if you can maintain your